Sometimes the road north doesn't just lead to another place, it leads to another world. In the frozen silence of Alaska, Henry and Margaret will discover that some legends never sleep. Part 1: The Road North. The morning light poured gently over the Rockies, painting the frost on the porch railings like thin ribbons of glass. Henry sat on the front steps with a steaming mug of coffee, his old flannel jacket buttoned all the way up. Buddy stretched beside him, letting out a low, satisfied sigh, his breath turning to mist in the chilly air. Inside the house, Margaret was humming softly as she packed sandwiches into a small cooler. The radio played some country tune about open roads and second chances. It was the kind of morning that made you feel like anything was possible. Henry looked out toward the mountains. "You know," he said, as Margaret stepped out with the cooler, "after all we've seen, the falls, the canyons, even that crazy magician in Vegas, I still feel like there's something calling out there, something north." Margaret smiled, eyes crinkling. "You just want an excuse to keep driving that old Ford until the wheels fall off." He chuckled. "Well, maybe, but don't tell him that. He still thinks he's 20. Buddy barked once, tail wagging as if to agree. They loaded up the F-150. Thermos, sandwiches, flannel blankets, maps. Margaret tucked a photo of their grandkids in the dashboard visor. "For luck," she said. By noon, they were on the open highway, the snow-capped peaks of Wyoming fading behind them, and the endless northern plains opening ahead. Radio static came and went as the miles rolled by, long roads where the sky felt twice as big as the earth. Henry drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping along to Johnny Cash. "You realize," he said, "we're about 2,000 miles from home and headed for the coldest place in America." "Perfect," Margaret replied, sipping her coffee from the thermos. "We'll warm it up." They laughed together, the kind of easy laughter that comes from decades of shared miles and quiet mornings. As daylight waned, they pulled into a truck stop near the edge of British Columbia. A neon sign flickered above the diner door, North Star Cafe, open all night. The parking lot was half buried in snow, and a single 18-wheeler sat humming beside the pumps. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of bacon and strong coffee. Old vinyl booths lined the windows, and a jukebox in the corner played a soft, crackly tune. Henry ordered black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. Margaret went for soup, something simple, something warm. The bell above the door jingled, and a big man in a heavy parka walked in, shaking the snow from his beard. He nodded politely and took the booth next to them. His eyes were tired but kind, the kind of eyes that had seen too many lonely highways. "Heading north?" he asked after a while, voice deep and gravelly. Henry nodded. "Yeah, thinking of crossing into Alaska. Been dreaming of it for years." The trucker smiled faintly. "Alaska's got a way of showing you more than you came for." He stirred his coffee, then leaned in slightly. "You ever heard of the Gnomes of the Frozen Hills?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Can't say we have. Sounds like a children's story." The man chuckled, eyes glinting. "That's what I thought too, till one winter I took a load up past Red Hill Pass. Snow so thick it swallowed the road. My rig broke down near midnight. No cell service, no lights, just the wind. Then I saw them, little lights moving along the ridge. Not lanterns, not headlights, just glows, like someone walking through the snow with a handful of stars." Henry leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I stayed put," the trucker said simply. "Watched them disappear behind the hill. When morning came, the road was clear, clean, like the storm never happened. Folks say the gnomes live under the hills, mining light itself. They keep the mornings coming." Margaret smiled, half amused, half intrigued. "Mining light. That's poetic." The man nodded. "Maybe, or maybe it's truth wearing a pretty coat. Up north, you learn that not everything you see comes from this world." The conversation drifted to talk of weather, road closures, the best coffee in Alaska. But the story lingered like wood smoke in Henry's mind. Mining light. He rolled the phrase over and over like a tune he couldn't shake. When they finally left the cafe, snow had begun to fall, slow, silent flakes under a pale moon. The trucker waved as he climbed into his rig. "If you see Red Hill Pass, keep your eyes open," he called out. "You never know who's watching the road." Back in the truck, Margaret poured more coffee and handed it to Henry. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" He smiled. "That the road north just got a little more interesting?" She grinned. "Exactly." They drove for hours under the stars, the snowflakes swirling in the headlights like 1,000 tiny fireflies. The heater hummed softly, and Buddy lay curled on the back seat, snoring gently. The road began to climb into the hills. The sky deepened from navy to black, the kind of dark that feels endless. Out there, between the forests and frozen lakes, there was a silence so complete that even the engine seemed afraid to break it. At the top of the pass, they stopped to stretch. The air was crisp, biting. Henry looked out over the white horizon. No sound, no movement, only snow and the faint glow of the northern lights curling above the distant peaks. "Feels like the world's holding its breath," Margaret whispered. Henry nodded. "Yeah, like it's waiting for something to wake it up." A faint breeze stirred, and for a moment Henry thought he heard something, like a whisper deep under the snow. Not words, exactly. More like a hum, a vibration, a heartbeat. He looked down the slope, where the snow glowed faintly blue. "Did you see that?" he asked. Margaret frowned. "See what?" "The light," he said quietly. "Down there, for a second." She looked, but it was gone. Only the white hills and the aurora painting the sky. "Probably just the reflection," she said softly, squeezing his hand. But Henry wasn't so sure. He kept looking north to where the hills curved away into shadow and whispered, "Maybe we're getting close." Buddy's ears twitched. Somewhere far off, the wind changed its tone, a low, rolling murmur like distant laughter echoing through stone. And for the first time that night, Henry smiled. "The road's still talking to us," he said. Margaret leaned against him, the two of them watching as the northern lights rippled like a curtain of dreams above the frozen world. Part 2: The Storm and the Signal. By the second day on the Alaskan highway, the snow had deepened to a soft, endless white. The road wound like a black ribbon through the wilderness. Mountains on both sides, spruce forests heavy with frost, and not a soul in sight. The radio gave up hours ago, replaced by the hum of the heater and the occasional squeak of the wipers pushing aside flakes the size of feathers. Henry's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he had that quiet grin, the one Margaret always trusted. "You know," he said, "if it weren't for all this snow, I'd say it's perfect driving weather." Margaret laughed softly, wrapping her hands around her thermos. "You'd say that in the middle of a blizzard, Henry." "Well," he shrugged, "that's because we've been through worse. Remember that night outside Cheyenne when the gas gauge broke?" "Oh, don't remind me," she said. "You tried to coast downhill to save fuel, and we ended up in a ditch." Buddy barked once from the back seat as if laughing too. The laughter carried them another mile until the wind began to rise. Snow started swirling faster, the horizon fading into a blur. The sky dimmed in the middle of the day, a gray so deep it looked almost blue. Henry leaned forward. "Well, sweetheart, looks like the weather's decided to put on a show." Margaret frowned at the windshield. "This doesn't look like a show. This looks like trouble." Within minutes, the storm hit in full force. The wind howled, rocking the truck, and the road vanished under drifts of snow. Henry slowed to a crawl, headlights stabbing through white chaos. The wipers fought a losing battle. "Should we stop?" Margaret asked, her voice tight. "If I can see where," he muttered, squinting into the storm. Then through the blowing snow, he spotted something, a dark outline off the road, a cabin, wooden, old, but standing strong against the storm. "Hang on," he said, steering carefully off the highway. The tires crunched through the snow, and moments later, the F-150 rolled to a stop beside the cabin's porch. The wind screamed as they opened the doors. Snow bit at their faces like salt and sand. Buddy leapt out, bounding through drifts, barking joyfully despite the cold. Henry pounded on the door. "Hello? Anyone home?" No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Margaret touched his arm. "Maybe it's abandoned." He nodded, pushing the door open. It creaked, slow and heavy, revealing a small, dim room inside. A single oil lamp sat on a table, dusted but still upright. Cobwebs draped the rafters, but an old boot sat by the hearth as if waiting for someone to return. They stepped inside, shaking off the snow. The air was cold but still. The kind of silence that felt, watched. Margaret rubbed her hands. "Cozy," she said, forcing a small smile. "If you like ghosts," Henry grinned, "long as they don't mind sharing the fire." He found some dry wood stacked near the wall, struck a match, and soon a small fire crackled in the hearth. The flicker of flame painted the walls with warmth, pushing back the shadows. As the storm raged outside, the three of them settled in. Margaret poured coffee, Buddy curled up near the fire, and Henry took out his old harmonica, playing a soft, wandering tune, something between country and memory. The storm howled, but inside, it felt like time had stopped. Then, just as the song faded, a light flickered outside the frosted window. Margaret turned. "Did you see that?" Henry rose, moving to the glass. At first, there was nothing but snow. Then, there it was again, a faint blue glow moving slowly between the trees. "Could be headlights," he said. "Headlights don't dance," Margaret whispered. He stared harder. The light split into two, then three, tiny orbs weaving through the snow like fireflies caught in a storm. They flickered, dimmed, and flared again, almost as if in rhythm. Buddy sat up, ears pricked, tail low. A quiet whine escaped his throat. Margaret moved closer. "Henry, I see it," he said softly. The glow drifted nearer, stopping just beyond the tree line. For a long moment it hovered there, silent, pulsing faintly. Then, one by one, the lights sank into the snow and vanished. Only the wind remained. They stood there for a while, listening. Then Henry turned back to the fire, rubbing his arms. "Must have been the reflection," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Margaret poured him more coffee. "Reflection of what?" "There's nothing out there but snow." He didn't answer, just sat down again, staring into the flames. Later that night, when the storm finally began to fade, Henry stirred awake to a soft sound, a low hum, deep and steady, coming from outside. It wasn't the wind this time. It had a rhythm, a pulse. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Margaret, and stepped to the window. Outside, under the fading storm clouds, the snow glowed faintly, lines of light tracing across the drifts like veins under skin. They ran down toward the valley, pulsing slowly, leading away from the cabin. And then, just for an instant, he thought he saw shapes, small, distant silhouettes moving across the ridge, too small to be people, too fast to be shadows. Henry whispered. The trucker wasn't lying. He stood there a long time, watching the lights fade one by one until the night went completely still again. By morning, the sky was clear, brilliant blue, endless. The world outside sparkled under a fresh layer of snow, untouched except for one strange thing: footprints. Small ones, perfectly round, like the prints of a child's boot. They circled the cabin once, then disappeared into the woods. Margaret saw them first when she stepped outside to stretch. "Henry, come look at this." He joined her on the porch, his breath catching when he saw. The prints shimmered faintly, dusted with frost. "Well," he said, smiling slowly, "looks like our visitors left us a calling card." Margaret shook her head, smiling back. "And you thought it was a reflection." He chuckled, slinging an arm around her shoulders. "Guess the North wanted to prove me wrong." Buddy bounded through the snow, barking joyfully at the morning light. The air smelled of pine and smoke, clean and sharp. They packed up their things, leaving a note on the table, just a simple, "Thank you for the shelter." Then, before stepping out, Henry paused, took one last look at the cabin, and said softly, "Whoever you are out there, keep the road clear for us." The wind seemed to answer with a soft sigh through the trees. Moments later, the F-150 rolled back onto the open road, its tires crunching through the snow. In the rearview mirror, the cabin shrank into the distance, tiny, alone, but somehow still alive. The road curved north again, into the pale light of morning, where the sky met the horizon like a promise waiting to be kept. And for the first time, Henry thought he could hear it, the faintest hum beneath the tires, almost like singing, the song of the frozen hills. Part 3. The Cavern of Lights. By the time they reached the small mining town of Talkeetna Ridge, the snow had turned into a light mist, glinting in the pale northern sun. The storm was just a memory now. Only the white hush of the wilderness surrounded them. The town was hardly more than a handful of wooden buildings, a diner with a flickering neon open sign, and a single gas pump that looked older than their truck. Henry parked the F-150 beside the diner, its engine ticking softly in the cold. Buddy jumped down first, shaking the snow from his fur. Margaret smiled. "I think he likes Alaska more than we do." Henry chuckled. "Can't blame him. Less traffic." Inside, the diner was warm and smelled like coffee, bacon, and old stories. A radio hummed faintly with some country tune from the 60s. Behind the counter stood a man built like a mountain, gray beard tucked into his flannel, hands steady as stone. "Morning, folks," he said. "You two look like you tangled with a blizzard." "We did," Henry answered, removing his hat. It won. The man laughed. Name's Earl. Been running this place longer than the highway's been paved. Coffee? 2 cups, Margaret said quickly, rubbing her hands near the heater. And maybe something hot for him. She nodded at Buddy, who wagged his tail expectantly. Earl poured the coffee and leaned in. Where you folks headed? Henry took a sip, savoring the heat. We're following Route 3 north. Want to see Denali? Maybe go all the way to Fairbanks if the weather holds. Earl nodded slowly. Fairbanks, huh? That's a long road. You'll see a lot of sky out there, and maybe a few things you didn't plan to. Margaret tilted her head. What kind of things? Earl gave a small grin. Ever hear about the Cavern of Lights? Henry looked up. Can't say I have. The old man set down the coffee pot and leaned closer. It's not on any map. Locals say it's tucked deep in the northern hills, past the frozen river. Used to be an old mine back when gold fever hit these parts. But the men who worked it, they said they found more than ore down there. What do you mean? Margaret asked, her curiosity piqued. Earl lowered his voice. They said the rocks glowed. Not from lamps or lanterns, from inside. Said the light was alive. Some claimed it whispered. Margaret smiled faintly. Whispering rocks. Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. Earl looked at her, eyes calm but serious. Up here, ma'am. Fairy tales just haven't learned they're real yet. For a while, none of them spoke. The radio hummed quietly. Buddy dozed by the fire. Then Henry said softly, Do you know where this cavern is? Earl hesitated, then nodded toward the window. There's an old logging road that veers west about 10 miles past the ridge. Don't follow it unless you mean it. It's easy to get lost, and folks say sometimes the mountain don't let you back the same way. Henry grinned. We've been lost before. Earl gave a half smile. Not like this. That evening, the 3 of them followed the dirt road into the hills. The snow was thinner here, and the trees grew taller, crowding over the path. The air smelled of pine and cold stone. After an hour, the path narrowed until they could go no further by truck. Henry parked near an outcrop, and they continued on foot, flashlights slicing through the dusk. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. Even Buddy slowed his pace, ears pricked. Henry, Margaret whispered, are we sure this is a good idea? He smiled over his shoulder. Nope. But since when did that stop us? They climbed higher, following what seemed like a trail of faint light shimmering under the snow. It pulsed softly, like fireflies buried beneath the ground. Finally, the trees opened, revealing the mouth of a cave. It was framed by jagged rocks and hung with long icicles that glowed faintly blue. The air was warmer here, and a soft hum echoed from within. Low, steady, like a heartbeat deep in the mountain. Henry aimed his flashlight inside. Well, he murmured, looks like we found it. Margaret squeezed his hand. Let's not wake whatever's sleeping. They stepped inside. The walls shimmered, not from their lights, but from within. Thin veins of crystal ran through the rock, glowing softly in shades of blue, gold, and green. The floor was smooth, glistening like polished stone. Margaret gasped. It's beautiful. Henry's voice dropped to a whisper. It's alive. Deeper in, the tunnel widened into a cavern, and that's when they saw them. Figures, small, half hidden in the shadows, not quite human, shorter, broader, their faces lined like carved stone. Their eyes caught the light, reflecting it like jewels. They stood still, silent, as if waiting. Buddy gave a quiet bark, then sat, tail wagging slowly. One of the figures stepped forward. Its voice was low, like gravel underwater. You came through the storm, Henry swallowed. We didn't mean to intrude. The figure tilted its head. Few mean to. Fewer listen. Margaret took a breath. Listen to what? The cavern seemed to hum in response, the light pulsing softly around them. The heart of the earth, the figure said. It speaks in echoes, in storms, in silence. You hear it only when you stop searching for gold. Henry stared at the glowing veins on the wall. Is this what you guard? The figure nodded. Not guard, remember. They stood in silence. The light danced around them, washing the walls with color. Margaret reached out, brushing her fingers over the stone. It was warm, alive. After a long while, the figure pointed toward the entrance. The storm is gone. The way is clear. Leave what you no longer need, and the mountain will remember you kindly. Henry reached into his coat pocket. The silver watch, the one from the magician in Vegas, caught the light. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he smiled softly. He placed it on a rock near the wall. The crystal veins flared brighter, as if the mountain itself breathed in acknowledgement. When they stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The northern lights rippled across the heavens, green and violet ribbons swirling in the night. Margaret leaned against Henry's shoulder. "You think that was real?" He looked up at the shimmering sky. "If it wasn't," he said, "it was something better." Buddy barked once, chasing his reflection in the snow. Far behind them, deep in the mountain, the light flickered one last time, steady and sure, like the ticking of a heart that had learned to glow in the dark. Parch cheered, the return of the lights. They left the mountain behind just as the sky began to pale. The truck rolled quietly along the frozen road, tires crunching over thin ice, steam rising from the exhaust into the cold morning air. The cavern, the lights, the strange beings, the whispering rock, already felt like a dream. Margaret sipped her coffee from a metal thermos, watching the clouds drift low across the peaks. "You think anyone would believe what we saw?" Henry chuckled. "They barely believe we drove this far." Buddy, stretched out on the back seat, gave a sleepy bark as if agreeing. By afternoon, the sky had turned gray, heavy with snow again. The road wound through miles of open tundra, past frozen lakes and lonely stretches of spruce forest. Everything glowed faintly blue in the low light, the kind of color that made you feel small, but somehow safe, like the world was too big to be cruel. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, the land rolled endlessly north, white, silent, eternal. Margaret stepped out, pulling her scarf tighter. The cold nipped at her cheeks. "Henry," she said softly, "look." In the distance, faint at first, a shimmer began to rise on the horizon, pale green, then gold, then a ripple of violet and rose. The northern lights were coming. Henry leaned against the truck, eyes reflecting the sky. "Well," he murmured, "seems they followed us." The aurora grew stronger, streaming across the heavens in slow, graceful waves. The snow around them shimmered in every color, green, pink, blue, until it looked like the whole valley was breathing. Margaret smiled. "Remember the watch, the magician, the canyon?" He nodded. "And the train made of light. I thought that was magic, but this," she took his hand, "maybe it's all the same thing, just showing up in different ways." For a long while they said nothing. The world had gone completely still, except for the faint hiss of wind through the trees. Then Henry reached into his coat pocket out of habit and stopped. His hand closed on air. The silver watch was gone. He smiled faintly. "Guess I really did leave it behind." Margaret's eyes stayed on the sky. "Or maybe it's still ticking, just not where we can hear it." Buddy barked suddenly, tail wagging. He trotted a few steps ahead, staring up as if trying to chase the ribbons of light themselves. Henry laughed softly. "That dog's gonna catch a piece of the sky one day." "Let him try," she said. "He's earned it." They built a small fire near the ridge, just enough to keep warm. The flames flickered gold against the snow, and the light from above danced across their faces. Margaret leaned back against the truck tire. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe these places find us, not the other way around?" Henry poked the fire thoughtfully. "Sometimes I think the road has better plans than we do." She smiled. "Then let's keep listening to it." The aurora flared brighter as if answering. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, Henry thought he saw a shape moving within the light. It was faint, almost too subtle to trust. A figure with a long coat, head slightly bowed, something glinting in his hand, a magician's smile. Henry blinked. The figure was gone. Only the light remained, flowing like silk across the stars. Margaret noticed his gaze. "What is it?" He hesitated, then shook his head with a small grin. "Just an echo, I guess." She squeezed his hand. "The best ones always come back." Later that night, the fire burned low, and they sat quietly, two silhouettes against the vastness of Alaska. The aurora shifted one last time, folding itself into a long golden streak that seemed to draw a path across the heavens, the shape of a road, fading into forever. Buddy lay beside them, head resting on Henry's boot, eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding the memory of everything they'd seen. Margaret whispered, "You think we'll ever find another place like this?" Henry looked up at the stars. "No," he said softly, "but I think places like this find us, when we're ready." The wind stirred, carrying the faintest sound, not quite a whisper, not quite a song. It was the rhythm of the earth, the heartbeat of time itself. And somewhere deep beneath the frozen ground, far beyond their reach, a tiny silver watch kept ticking, slow, steady, eternal, as if reminding them that every ending is just another beginning. End of the Alaska cycle, the road beyond time.